opinions and a lot of very passionate folks. I want to open it back up to council for comments after hearing from the public. Anyone on council? Chuck?
I would just like the city manager, if you would, explain to everyone the difference between the medical marijuana dispensary and the recreational, and what the laws state now, and why we do or do not have, or why we do not have a medical dispensary in Decatur at this time.
Councilman Kuhle, thank you for that question. The medical dispensaries are legal now. Nothing in the law allows the city council to prohibit them. If you were to opt out of everything, there can still be medical dispensaries. I believe that the reason why there's not a medical dispensary in Macon County is simply because no one has asked for a license to do so. They could do so as long as they meet all of the state requirements. And regardless of how the city council felt about that, it would be allowed, because you have no authority to regulate medical dispensaries. You only have authority to regulate recreational sales.
Okay. Thank you. I think there was some confusion over that. I'm glad you stated that so everyone understands that position.
Mr. Manager, I might make this point. It's my understanding that the legislature has a limited number of medical dispensary licenses, so it is not in our power to act unless one is granted or offered.
It is true that the state places limitations on the licenses, as they would do, and as the packet material shows, in both the recreational and in the medical dispensary category. But I think that the principle is, as I understand it, I can be corrected if I'm wrong, that the reason why there's not one in Decatur is not because of a limitation on licenses at the state level. It's because no one has taken the effort, made the investment, or whatever necessary to pursue that business opportunity for Macon County.
Councilman Horn.
Several weeks ago, I mentioned that one of the deciding factors for me on whether to opt out of adult use cannabis dispensary is what negative effects of cannabis will be worse if we are selling cannabis in Decatur as opposed to individuals purchasing it elsewhere. And most of tonight's discussion has focused on negative or positive effects of cannabis and its impacts at the state level, but really hasn't talked about effects at a local level. But I will address a couple of things that have been talked about tonight. The first is in regards to medical dispensaries. It's important to note that medical dispensaries have been legal since January 1st of 2014. So it's been approximately 6 years since Decatur has been eligible for a medical dispensary, but does not have them. There are currently 20 of 22 cultivation centers and 55 of 60 allowable dispensaries. So the hurdle is not that we can't have a cultivation center or a medical dispensary, we just don't have one. And so from that perspective, there is a problem in Decatur, and that is a lack of access of medical cannabis. And one key solution is to have an adult use cannabis dispensary in Decatur. We have individuals that have medical needs, they're not being met now, and it could certainly be simply that there is not enough demand to have one. That could change if we have adult use cannabis. Second, there's been a lot of discussion about the impact that this will have on youth, and I received from the Chief of Police a report from the Colorado Division of Criminal Justice that's titled "The Impacts of Marijuana Legalization in Colorado," a report pursuant to Senate Bill 13283, dated October 2018. And it talks about youth impacts, and bear with me, I'm going to read it in its entirety, so here we go. Data on youth marijuana use was available from two sources: the Healthy Kids Colorado survey, with 47,146 high school and 6,704 middle school students responding in 2017, and the National Survey on Drug Use and Health with about 512 respondents. So I'm going to focus on the study that had 47,000 respondents. The study results indicate no significant change in past 30-day use of marijuana between 2013, it was 19.7%, and 2017, 19.4%. Also, in 2017, the use rates were not different from the national 30-day use rates reported by the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. In 2017, 19.4% of Colorado high school students reported using marijuana in the past 30 days compared to 19.8% of high school students nationally that reported this behavior. If the argument has been this will impact our youth, the study that was completed by the Colorado Division of Criminal Justice has argued that, if anything, use rates among have remained steady and not increased. And there is no one here that is arguing for increased youth access or use of cannabis. No one wants that. And so I think that the argument that this will increase youth usage is not correct, as reported by Colorado. Thank you.
Other comments from council? Other comments from council?
Mayor?
Yes.
It's just a point of clarification from the city manager, just so that we understand that if there would be a decision either now or in a month or two to opt out, that would not be a final decision because the matter could come before the council or before the community in a referendum to have a reverse of that decision.
Councilman Faber, I believe that's correct. If the city council was to opt out, you are at liberty to reverse that decision or modify it in some way in the future by majority action of the city council. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other comments from council? So at this point, Mr. Wrighton, do we want to have the city attorney read the ordinance proposed, or how would you like to proceed from here?
Well, it's council's pleasure. As I mentioned to you earlier, both of the ordinances that are under this question number 1, we haven't got to questions 2 and 3 yet, although I understand that this is the most important one. The questions that she can go through the ordinance, that's fine, and if you have some questions about it, that would be the appropriate time because she's the one who's really put the most time into drafting it. But those ordinances are irrelevant if you opt out. If you opt in, then you'll need to pay attention to the answer to these questions on the screen, which are addressed more specifically in those ordinances. So it's your pleasure.
So at this point, I'm looking to council. Do we want to have the city attorney read the ordinance 52.3, which would prohibit cannabis dispensing organizations in the city?
I don't think there's any reason. I mean, Wendy can make a very short summary of the ordinances. There's no harm in that regardless, even though you haven't decided on opt-in or opt-out.
Okay. First, Mr. Horn.
Mayor, I'd like to get a sense from the council as to whether they would like to table discussion of these ordinances tonight. We've heard from about 30 individuals this evening. I'd like a little bit more time to reflect on the information they provided. And from my perspective, even if we were to discuss these on our next meeting, October 7th, that would be beneficial to me.
So you would prefer that I poll the council to see if majority would like to table?
That would be great.
Okay. Mr. Faber?
Yes, Mayor, I agree with Mr. Horn's suggestion because, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I was here to listen to the public.
Mr. McDaniel? Oh, he had no microphone. He prefers not to table, correct? Okay. Ms. Gregory?
No.
Mr. Kuhle?
Agree with Councilman Horn.
With Councilman Horn? So that would be, and I would prefer not to table, so that would be 3 to table, 4 not to table. So just in a random poll, so we should move ahead. And if we could have Corporation Counsel explain the ordinances. That's just not to table.
The ordinances as drafted and as presented under this first item, if the council makes a decision to opt in, you will see the ordinance to opt in under the second question, as it includes all the other businesses. So the only opt-in decision that you see before you on this question is the tax question, and that's under 51.6. It would be the addition of a new chapter in the city code. And the way the ordinance is written, it would impose the 3% tax, which is the maximum that municipalities can impose. The alternative, if council decides to opt out, would be the addition of a new chapter 52.3, and it's very simple. It would prohibit cannabis dispensing organizations, and only that. You will see under the second question, you'll have to make decisions about infusers, processors, craft growers, the other businesses.
But that's only for recreational, correct? Not medicinal?
Correct. None of these have any effect whatsoever. The statute's very clear. This does not affect medicinal. As a matter of fact, the statute contains language that if the two are in conflict, the medical cannabis statute is the controlling authority.
Any other comments from council before we ask the clerk to move ahead with reading to see if we have a motion and a second on ordinance 52.3? Madam Clerk?
Motion that the ordinance do pass and be adopted.
Should we clarify exactly what this means with a yes vote? A yes vote would mean to opt out, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Wait. But these ordinances only apply if they opt out. Excuse me, if they opt in.
52.3 is specifically is the opt-out for...
I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah,
sorry,
cannabis
wait.
dispensing organization.
52.3 is the opt-out ordinance.
Yeah, and the clerk probably should read the title of the ordinance.
Ordinance adding Chapter 52.3 to City Code prohibiting cannabis dispensing organizations. Motion that the ordinance do pass and be adopted.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion from council? Mr. Horn?
I am opposed to opting out of a adult use cannabis dispensary. We clearly have a need for medical cannabis in the city of Decatur. It has been legal for 6 years, but we still have individuals that have to drive long distances to obtain it. It's a legal product, and there are medical studies that have shown some benefits, including pain relief, and I do not feel that opting out benefits those citizens. In addition, we are losing a source of revenue for which we don't know how much revenue it is, but there are no benefits to that revenue going to other cities because it is us, the city of Decatur, that will face whatever negative societal consequences there are to adult use cannabis. And so for these reasons, I oppose opting out.
Other comments from council? Mr. Kuhle?
City Manager, would you please clarify again, because I'm confused by Councilman Horn's statement. We can't have a medical marijuana dispensary in this town without a recreational marijuana dispensary. It's just, I assume by his comments, it would be easier to have all in one. Is that what I'm hearing?
I won't speak for Councilman Horn.
Right.
It's true that there has not been a medical dispensary. If there was someone in this room or some other who wanted to invest in that, then it would be allowed by the state and could be done so as soon as they went through that process.
The licenses were limited when medical
Okay, but
dispensaries...
what I'm asking is, why can't we have a medical dispensary here and not a recreational? That's what I'm trying to get
The
to.
licenses were limited at
What's
the
that?
time. The licenses were limited at the time.
Okay, thank
So
you.
it had changed. So. Other comments from council regarding this ordinance?
Mayor,
Mr. Faber?
may I move to suspend the rules for just a moment so Mr. Phillips can address the question? He says he's telling us he's got the answer to Mr. Kuhle's question specifically.
Well, I think we've heard from the audience this evening, and medical marijuana is not what we are talking about this evening.
Mayor, I'm making a motion to suspend the rules. Yeah.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion on the floor and a second to suspend the rules and allow additional comment.
Councilwoman Gregory?
No.
Councilman Horn?
Aye.
Councilman Kuhle?
Aye.
Councilman McDaniel?
No.
Councilman Walker?
Aye.
Councilman Faber?
Aye.
Mayor Moore-Wolfe?
Aye. Mr. Phillips?
The answer is actually pretty simple. It's in two parts. As you've already explained, the number of dispensaries is limited by the state. It is also a very strenuous process to apply and very expensive, requiring lots of insurance. So it requires basically a corporate backer. We don't have one here in Decatur. That's why we haven't been able to get one. If I had a corporate backer, I would open a medical dispensary tomorrow. Do you know one?
Actually, Mr. Phillips, there were two applicants from this area specifically that were corporation-backed that were in place to try and get a medical dispensary when it was opted. Well, they were limited. Yeah. So Decatur wasn't chosen. Okay, moving back to our ordinance.
Mayor, I do have a
Yes.
comment.
I'm sorry, Mr. Faber.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Mayor, I would like to maybe refocus and reframe the question that's before us, because we've heard some very articulate citizens speak, on the one hand about money and revenue that may come to the city, and the other on the side of, say, morals that may apply. And what I would like to do is drive right down the middle on this one and talk about something that is even more important than the question that's before us this evening, and that is the strength of our local democracy. What can we do to strengthen citizen engagement and participation, not just on this issue, but on a whole panoply of issues? And so tonight we have a very, very controversial social policy issue that is very, very new and transformative to our community. So, Mayor, it seems to me that we would be very ripe to ask for the citizens to bring their answer to this question through a voter-binding referendum. And I would be making... And Mayor, at the appropriate time, I would be making that motion to, as an amendment to the ordinance that has been called before us to talk about.
If I could ask Corporation Counsel, is this and we have a motion on the floor, so Mr. Faber, I believe that time would be now, but otherwise we are going to be voting on the opt-out ordinance.
As long as, I didn't want to preclude anyone else from further discussion, Mayor, so I would make that motion to add to to amend the opt-out ordinance to include a provision that the City Council would put on the next available ballot, the amendment for a voter referendum binding. Then the question would be, does the City of Decatur approve recreational dispensary?
And you did say a binding referendum.
And the reason I say that, Mayor, is because we have had experience in our community in the past where there was a non-binding referendum. The citizens came back with answers and the City Council ignored. So the advantage of a binding referendum is that whatever the community decides is going to stick firmer, longer, and better.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Madam Clerk, we have a motion and a second on the floor.
So just for clarification purposes, the motion on the floor is on the amendment only, not on the ordinance. And so if the amendment passes, then you'll have to vote again on the ordinance as amended.
Correct. Is everybody clear on what we are voting on at this point?
Is there more comment available?
From here, yes, from this body. Yes, Mr. Kuhle?
Okay, I'm just going to repeat what I said before. I had many emails, and I always sent back, what's wrong with waiting? And I never did get one response from the pro-cannabis side as to what's wrong with waiting. Why can't we wait? What's a year or two going to hurt? We have never had it before. Why can't we wait now? And if we were going to, let me finish.
Order, please.
If we were going to do a
Order, please.
If we were going to do a referendum, I could possibly see it a couple of years from now, but I told you before, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't believe anybody knows what's going to happen, and if we could just watch and see what goes on around us for a couple of years, we'd have a better feel for it. That's how I feel. All right?
Order.
And so I probably wouldn't support this Councilman Faber at this time, but I could see a couple of years down the road possibly when we have more facts.
Order in the chambers. Mr. Walker?
I'm going to have to disagree with you this time.
That's all right. That's why we're here.
I'm going to have to go with Mr. Faber on this one. At the end of the day, as I said in the beginning, we are not dictators. Okay? You guys are all constituents. You're the ones who put us in this position. So we have to truly be an extension for you all. I've received several emails, some yay, some nay. A lot of emails I received are from functional, I won't say addicts, but functional users. You have some of you that, and many of you in this room seem like you're exceptions to the rule. I played basketball with a kid from New York when I was at New Mexico State, and he was an exception to the rule. And if he couldn't smoke before the game, he was worthless. Okay? But if he did, he went out there and got me 15 points and 10 rebounds. So it's always exceptions to the rules, but at the end of the day, I believe it should be up to you guys to vote it, and not put it on the backs of council.
Further
And if it's that important, we'll see what the numbers look like. Hopefully the numbers will be better than it was for the local election.
Further discussion from council? Yes. Manager.
Mayor, just a point of order, just to clarify, because I want to be clear before you vote. And I may have to defer to Corporation Council on this. I understand the desire of the motioner to have this a binding referendum. I'm not sure under Illinois law you can do that. It may have to be advisory, although I'm sure that City Council would take proper cognizance of whatever the citizens vote on. The next regular election on which you could place whether it's advisory or binding is the March primary, the same time that Illinois would have its presidential primary and primary for selection of other partisan candidates. That would be the first time. So what effectively means is that if the amendment passes, then you would be opting out until such time as you had the referendum, and if the referendum indicated a different direction, then you'd be committing yourselves to amend the ordinance. I think that's what the effect of this is my understanding. Bill, your direction.
Yes, Mr. Ryan, that's my intention, and I don't think I would object to having it placed on the November presidential election cycle either. That would be easier for the city to formulate the referendum.
You said the next election, which
that
would be
motion was with
March.
the next election.
Right, but I did say that, but it could be either or. If the April election was an impediment, then the March election was an impediment, then the November election, I think, would satisfy. My aim, Mayor, is to have the issue decided by the community at an expeditious time.
Mr. McDaniel?
Corporate Counsel, what is the Illinois law on that before we start voting? Is it, can it be a non-binding or a binding referendum?
I am not aware of binding. I've got suggested language if you want to hear how the amendment, I would suggest it would read.
Read the amendment as you have it.
I would suggest then in Chapter 52.3 that Section 7 now read, "The City Council shall place a referendum on the next regular election as allowed by Illinois law, asking, shall the City of Decatur allow cannabis dispensing organizations in the City of Decatur as allowed by the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act with the Public Act number?" I would then suggest that the current Section 7 would be the new 8 and would read, "This ordinance shall be in full force and effect from and after its passage and approval and publication is required by law and until the results of a public question referendum is held and the results certified as required by law."
Is that motion acceptable to the mover and second?
Mr. Wright, it's my understanding that the City Council would either have to adopt a specific resolution or an ordinance directing that the issue be placed on the referendum.
I believe-
That's correct. And that would have to, then
Yeah.
we'd bring that back with the best verbiage.
Is it binding or non-binding? No.
Don't know, Pat. I need to, I would have to look at the election law. I don't want to tell you. I'm not aware that there is a binding referendum in the state of Illinois.
I would suggest, so we don't make the audience upset when we find out that we cannot have a binding referendum, that we can always come back and amend the what's on the table now. But let's don't do something that we find out that can't be done, and then you're going to have more people upset.
You can have the referendum. What we don't know is whether it's binding or not.
Right, but that, if it's not binding and everybody votes for it and we can't, and we don't, the council doesn't go along with it, that's, we've had problems in the past as as Councilman Faber said, the county had one and the city had one, and that really upset a lot of people. So why don't we get our ducks in order first before we can always come back and amend what we're voting on tonight and amend it for the referendum when we find out some more information.
So the motion on the floor would call for a referendum on the issue at the next election. At this point, we are calling for a binding, and if that is not allowed, we will come back and amend to a non-binding if it passes. Is that? Yes.
Okay, again, the motion on the floor is just the amendment. It's not the ordinance.
Correct. Other discussion? Is everyone clear, Councilman Gregory?
I'm going to be voting no to amend the ordinance that we have on. And the reason is...
Order, please.
The reason is there's far too much confusion in this chamber to ensure that what we are doing is accurate. This body can always come back and make this change.
Other comments from council before we vote on the referendum? Mr. Kuhle.
I'm just going to say again, I heard everybody speak. Everybody's got a valid point. A lot of them are true, even on the pro-cannabis side. This is a tough issue, but we were elected to make these decisions. I will be voting no on this to have a referendum. Possibly in a couple of years, I would maybe look at it, but I've already stated my case about waiting. I won't say it again.
Madam Clerk, call the question.
Councilwoman Gregory?
No.
Councilman Horn?
Aye.
Councilman Kuhle?
No.
Councilman McDaniel?
Nay.
Councilman Walker?
Aye.
Councilman Faber?
Aye.
Mayor Moore-Wolfe?
No.
3 ayes, 4 nays.
Now moving on to the opt-out ordinance. Whether or not to opt out will be next on the table. We'll give it a moment to clear the chambers.
We can't even vote for it?
Okay, we're going to move on to...
And there's there's a motion currently on the floor.
Yes, back to the motion that was originally on the floor. Additional discussion before we call the question on that. Mr. Horn.
Question for corporate counsel. The fourth whereas says, quote, "The city of Decatur has determined that the operation of a cannabis dispensing organization would present adverse impacts upon the health, safety, and welfare of the residents, and additional costs, burdens, and impacts upon the law enforcement and regulatory operations of the city of Decatur." In my view, that was not established tonight. Secondly, under Section 1, it says the facts and statements contained in the preamble to this ordinance are found to be true and correct and are hereby adopted as part of this ordinance. As has been argued, there is currently a need for cannabis, adult use, and also for medical cannabis in the city of Decatur. And we currently do not have it. I will stress there is an opportunity for medical cannabis dispensaries in Decatur. We have not maximized the number in the state. And so if anything, there is evidence that there is adverse impacts upon health to opting out. Furthermore, the cost, burdens, and impacts, again, what may happen is that revenue is lost and is gained by other communities while we increase our societal costs to adult use cannabis. So I again do not think the city has brought forth the evidence necessary to opt out.
Call the question.
No, Mayor, I have a comment.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. You know, Mayor, Mr. Phillips and some other, and former Representative Dunn brought forth the caution to move slowly. This Medical Cannabis Regulation Act that is mentioned in our ordinance is still a work in progress. There's going to be a trailer bill, maybe the October session, and maybe the following session. So we're really asked to decide on an imperfect, uncrafted, unfulfilled statute, and then adopt it as part of our local legislation. It would seem to me that we should not make an important policy decision based upon an ordinance or a statute that is not fully crafted, not fully formulated, and it was just kind of, in some aspects, a guesswork. It would seem to me that the prudent and wise thing for this deliberative body to do would be to not address this issue, to table it, and wait until the smoke clears, so to speak, as Councilman Kuhle was kind of alluding to, until we have a really good picture, vivid picture of the implications of this Cannabis Act. It's my understanding, Mr. Wrighton, that there's nothing that compels us to address this question tonight or next month. There's no significant deadline other than maybe to adopt a tax ordinance so that we could tax the sale of marijuana if it was being sold in our city. So there's really no compelling reason, Mayor, for us to act tonight. No compelling reason.
My understanding is, and you know, it's my understanding, if we do not take action, then and set a tax rate, et cetera, decide whether to opt in or opt out, it's assumed that we are opting in, and so the zoning would fall under what the state guidelines have been set, and we would have no tax rate without opting in. My concern in that is then it becomes assumed it is legal, and people invest, they apply for the licenses, which are expensive, they invest in a dispensary and perhaps set up shop, and then if we came back later, we have no opportunity to say we're opting out now without putting the city at risk because someone has already invested. That is my concern. I agree with Councilman Kuhle wholeheartedly. We don't have to rush into this. Let's see what happens in other communities. But that would be my reason for wanting to opt out at this time. We can change our minds. We can change our minds on a referendum. We can do all of those things. But my understanding is if we don't opt out, we're somewhat automatically opting in. No, you're not. So,
I just note, Mayor, that
order.
in the list of municipalities that have approved or disapproved or done nothing, that Highland Park has not made any decision in terms of this statute. And they're a very sophisticated governing body with a very bright and talented mayor and city manager, and they've opted to do nothing at this point.
And Naperville, a license was in the process of being applied for and moving forward, and 4 or 5 days later, the council took the issue up because they wanted to make the decision as to whether it was in their community.
And Naperville did opt out,
yes.
but they also are going to have a non-binding referendum, which I have suggested. But
And you can certainly bring back at a later date. Is there other discussion on the opt-out issue before we move forward with the vote?
Mayor, I would again make a motion to table it. I mean, Councilman Horn brought it up, I think informally, asking for a showing or a consensus or indication of if we would table it, but I would like to make that formal motion to table it.
We have a motion and a second to table the issue on the floor. Madam Clerk?
Councilwoman Gregory?
No.
Councilman Horn?
Aye.
Councilman Kuhle?
No.
Councilman McDaniel?
No.
Councilman Walker?
Aye.
Councilman Faber?
Aye.
Mayor Moore-Wolfe?
No.
3 ayes, 4 nays.
So we are moving forward with the question on the floor.
Mayor, may I make one more comment? With regard to where we are tonight, then, because of where we are tonight and because we can revise our decision-making process and we can look at it again, I will vote in favor of a opt-out.
Madam Clerk, if you'll call the question.
Councilwoman Gregory?
Yes.
Councilman Horn?
No.
Councilman Kuhle?
Yes.
Councilman McDaniel?
Yes.
Councilman Walker?
Yes.
Councilman Faber?
Aye.
Mayor Moore-Wolfe?
Aye.
6 ayes, 1 nay.